Welcome back to the Made for This podcast, where we want to help you discover, develop, and live your Made for This. So we are a few episodes into this thing now, and we have been spending the last several episodes kind of starting the conversation about what is Made for This, why is it important, and how do we begin the journey of discovering what that is. And today, we're going to start kind of a two-part process where Nikki and I are both going to interview one another about our own Made for Thises. We still haven't figured out how to pluralize that. So if you have any suggestions, let us know. But we're going to start this episode off, and I'm going to interview Nikki and just kind of walk through, how what her Made for This is and how she has come to where she is today. And then in the next episode, she is going to turn the tables and do the same thing for me. And then we will start to hear from some other voices. But before we get started on here, we always want to start with something a little bit fun. And I've gotten some good feedback on these, and I enjoy the conversation because they're light, but they're also a little contentious, and that's always fun. But this episode, we want to hear from you all, especially if you're listening to this, but we're going to talk about what is better, an ebook or a physical book. So, Nikki, I'm going to let you make the first pitch.
Okay. I am a huge proponent for ebooks. Mm-hmm. I have a Kindle Paperwhite. I absolutely love it. I'd have to check my thing. I think I'm on at least a 70-day streak right now. But I have a pretty perfect week record as far as like reading, however many days it requires that you read. And so that is something that I started reading on an e-reader, like strictly on a Paperwhite, because I'm really bad about distractibility. If I'm reading on a device that has internet access, the book will trigger a thought, and then I will go down a rabbit hole and Google and do all those things. So the Paperwhite for me is very strategic in keeping me dialed in on that. Mm-hmm. But I love accessing like the online library through Libby, and I can check out just about any book that I want to read on there. And so that has been a huge game changer for me. And I can read in the dark, and I don't bother anybody.
Yeah, that's a perk. My wife is she got a Kindle for Christmas this past year and has been burning through books on that thing.
Yeah, I have turned her and one of our other friends into ebook girlies as well. I've convinced them.
Did they both get Kindles for Christmas? Oh, I guess that's...
I got my mom one too.
Amazon, you should be getting Amazon commissions for how many
Amazon,
Kindles?
You want to sponsor me?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm sure we can get Jeff Bezos to...
Yeah. And I bought my daughter a Kindle Fire for Christmas, and so now she reads ebooks.
See, okay, so I, on the other side of this table, am a physical book person. I think, and you touched on something important. I think that the biggest thing for me is distractibility. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have a Kindle. I haven't tried my wife's, but I don't have a Kindle. I just got an iPad. I'd never actually had an iPad before recently, and I'm thinking maybe the size and it feels more like a book. I'm going to give it a try with like a Kindle app. But for the most part, I get distracted looking at a screen. Whereas if I'm in a book, I don't get as distracted. However, I would add to that something about the tactile nature of a physical book is valuable to me. If you look around, if you're watching on YouTube and you look around the studio, I've got all these books that I've read, and I hold them in my hand, and I will write in books. I know that Kindle has a mechanism for that, and you can see your notes, but I write in books. I underline and I jot down little things in the margins, and I can somehow in my brain go back and find those. And I don't know. I've always been a physical book person.
So the Paperwhite I like because the screen feels like paper. Yeah. It's different. It doesn't feel like an electronic. It has a paper feel to it. The other benefit that I will say that has been huge, and my mom was saying this the other day with the Kindle and the ebook. Have you ever found yourself reading a book and you read a word and you're like, I know what that means, context clues or whatever, but you don't actually know what that word means.
Yeah.
Or you find yourself like, I thought I knew what that word meant, but they've used it in an entirely different context. Mm-hmm. If you're reading in an ebook, you can hold down the word and it will give you the definition.
That is helpful.
And so I'm a big vocabulary person. I love learning new words and expanding my vocabulary and being able to interject new exciting words. And so that has been really cool to be able to learn. And my daughter uses that feature on hers too. So she can learn new words when she stumbles upon something and can't figure it out.
That's valuable. So I've been a physical book person for my whole life.
Yeah.
I'm open to learning to be an ebook person.
I will still, if I'm reading a series of books and the ebook is not available, I will march my butt into the library and get that paper book because I'm not about to wait.
Yeah, wait for
Yeah.
one of Kelsey's is on hold for like 600 days or something. It's like, you're going to forget what you read.
Yeah. I have found that if I learn about a book series on TikTok, I'm not it's going to have crazy hold times.
Yeah, because everyone learned about it on TikTok and they went and put their hold in. So here's one that may be for a different podcast, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Do audiobooks count?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We're on the same page there. I will say that I have recently changed my stance on that. And actually, John Acuff is to credit for me changing my stance on that because I'll set goals. Like I want to read, 50 books this year.
Right.
And I won't count audiobooks because I don't feel like I actually read them and engaged with them in the same way.
Yeah.
However, recently, funny enough, listening to John Acuff's audiobook because he changed my mind about audiobooks, I think that counts now.
Yeah.
And
I heard somebody say the other day, because they were making a joke about, like, my friend was like, audiobooks don't count. It's like, how dare you say that your sense is better than my sense?
yeah.
Like, just seeing is better than hearing? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. That's
at
not fair.
all. Like, that would be saying, like, like someone who can't read shouldn't get to say that they enjoyed a book.
Yeah, that's fair.
Listen, I think if you take in the information, it really doesn't matter how you took in the information.
I do think I have to be a little bit more intentional about engaging an audiobook because I can't wander around and do other things.
Yeah.
Whereas I do when I'm listening to podcasts because they're conversational like this, and it's a little different.
I have found the only books I can listen to as audiobooks, like I listened to Rob Bell's Velvet Elvis as an audiobook, but that book reads like a podcast.
Yeah.
Each chapter almost like listening to it, it's more like listening to episodes of a podcast each chapter. And so that was easier for me to engage with. If it flows like a book, I struggle with auditory processing anyway. And so I have trouble if I can't visualize. Like if I'm listening to my Bible, I will read along on my phone with the Bible because it helps me stay focused.
Yeah.
But I can listen faster than I can read. And so that is a benefit to that. But I still have to be able to look at the words too. So I struggle with audiobooks, but people that can do it, more power to them.
Yeah. That's
incredible.
I think I also have learned that sometimes when I'm listening to an audiobook, I will find out within a couple chapters, like I need to go get a real book and actually put my hands on this because I can't, it's just too, the information is delivered in a way that I need to see. However, if you've never listened to a John Acuff audiobook, he's just as funny.
Does he read his books?
Yes, he does.
I love that when the author reads them.
Yep.
That's beneficial.
He's so funny, and he's funny when he speaks. He's funny on his podcast. He's really funny when he's reading his audiobooks. And so I would say if you could,
I'm going to have to listen to some of his because I thoroughly enjoyed his daughter's book, your new playlist.
Yeah, based on the soundtracks.
Yeah, based on soundtracks. So I'll have to check out some of his audiobooks.
Yeah, they're really good. So if you're listening to this, let us know in whatever way you can. Comment or email us or whatever. Post something on social and tag us.
Comment and tell me I'm right.
Yeah. Let us know. Are you an ebook person or a physical book person? Or maybe you're just here for the podcast. Maybe you're not a reader and you're just a podcaster.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay too. If you want to weigh in on the audio book thing, I think you can, but maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. But we're going to go ahead and sort of get into kind of the conversation today. And Nikki, I'm really excited to hear you kind of articulate this in this format, because I've heard, you and I have been friends a long time, and I've heard you talk about you're made for this, and I've seen you step into and live that in real, practical life. But it's really, I'm just excited to hear you kind of unpack some of this. And so I guess the first thing that I would love to hear is can you just tell us what you believe that you were made for, and what that looks like right now?
So articulating my made for this is something that I have struggled with throughout the years, because knowing what it is and articulating it a little different. Is a little different. And I've gone through some stages of, I think, narrowing it too much and attaching it to a job title. So what I've come down on and kind of processing, knowing that this was coming up, I think at the core, my made for this is really, it's definitely dialed into kind of the teenage part of life. So definitely those kind of like 6th through 12th grade, that age range of like 11 to 18-year-olds. But really helping that specific age demographic learn their values and what they believe. And that spans so much that, recently in, my most recent position that I left, that really was a lot focused on their values and their belief system as far as their Christ-centered worldview. But it's broader than that. And we'll talk about that a little bit about how I'm living it out right now. But it's really just looking at their life as a whole, how they approach life, what they value, and really learning how to stand for that and learning to be able to articulate it and say, this is who I am. These are my values, and I'm going to stand and be confident in that.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think it's really important for those listening to recognize something that you said is that it's not attached to a job title.
Right.
And it can be easy. And a lot of times there's overlap, there's parallel, but it doesn't have to be attached to that. You've transitioned into kind of a new phase of your life here recently. And so while your job title has changed, your made for this hasn't, or at least hasn't wholly, flipped. It just has kind of, adapted. So tell us what that looks like today. What does it look like to live that in your daily life today?
So interestingly enough, the kind of discovering my made for this started, I think it's been almost 7 years now. I'm bad at math. 2016, 2017, somewhere around in there, I was approached to start participating in a program called Truth Talks, which for those of you who do not know or aren't in our area and aren't familiar with it, it is sexual risk avoidance education, specifically with middle schoolers. And everybody just got really nervous when I said that. You were like,
especially me.
And so what that looks like is really spending time with middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, talking with them about not just physical changes that their bodies and everyone's bodies obviously go through, but how to navigate that and how to look at yourself as a whole person, how to look at your emotional, mental, and social well-being as well during that process, and how to really start developing, recognizing your value, your worth, and how that translates into your relationships, how that translates into developing healthy relationships, who you choose to surround yourself with friends-wise, how you engage in relationships with your parents and adult mentors. All of those things are so necessary in life that if you don't intentionally decide, kind of get decided for you. Yeah. And so that's really what it focuses in on. And when I was asked to do that, at first I was like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. It wasn't really something that I necessarily felt that I was uniquely gifted for. What I did know, and some of you who are not in the spiritual realm might be weirded out by this, what I did know was that just a few months prior to being asked that, I had heard a very audible call from what I believe to be God via the Holy Spirit, calling me into student ministry of some kind, calling me into this realm of ministering to middle and high school students. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I was serving with little preschoolers at church at the time. And I was a stay-at-home mom. And so I wasn't really anywhere I had little kids. And so I wasn't anywhere near the realm of teenagers. But I'd heard that, and then I had someone approach me about this Truth Talks program. And so when I got involved in it, it really very quickly became obvious that this was something that I really was uniquely kind of positioned and gifted, that it was something that I was able to have conversations with pretty apparent ease, that it wasn't something that came difficult. There wasn't a lot of things that made me uncomfortable. There weren't a lot of subjects I would shy away from. It was just something that came very natural for me to be able to look at middle schoolers and talk about these really uncomfortable things and make it not uncomfortable for them. Over the years, I've had lots of middle schoolers some of these middle schoolers write notes, and it's really sweet. Like, they haven't lost the art of a handwritten thank you note. I've gotten a lot of thank you notes. You wouldn't think that from middle schoolers, but over the years, I've gotten a lot of handwritten thank you notes from middle school students saying, you took really awkward subjects and made them less awkward. And I appreciate that. And so that's kind of where that started. It transitioned into an actual job in student ministry for a period of time, where I was still doing that. So I've been with the Truth Talks program since 2017, and I still continue to do the Truth Talks program. Just finished up last week with one of our last rounds of Truth Talks for this school year.
Right.
So I'm still very much a part of that program. Absolutely love it. Would not ever step away from it, probably.
Yeah.
You'd have to pry from my cold, dead fingers. Pretty much. But it did transition into an actual role in student ministry. And that is where I started to shape that idea of my Made for This a little bit more, that it wasn't just about Truth Talks. It wasn't just about helping students develop these ideas around healthy relationships, but that it was so much broader in that I really had this passion for teenagers to start to own their beliefs and their values and really step into developing what I've now started calling an unborrowed faith.
Yeah.
And really starting to step away from, this is what mom and dad said I should believe, this is what mom and dad said I should do and value, into this is what I believe, this is what I value, this is what I stand for, and really knowing the why behind the what and helping them navigate that, because that's something that is just, there's infinite value in
absolutely.
that.
And if you're listening to this and that resonates with you, you, Nikki, have just started your new website, and you're now kind of starting to take that idea to the mainstream, which is really, really cool. So if you're listening to this, we'll leave a link to that in the show notes. It's just unborrowed.org. That's a great URL. You got a great URL. But yeah, I got a front row seat to see some of that start to develop when we were, colleagues at our previous job. And it's just really, really cool to see that. I have to say, for me to work with middle schoolers, I would also have had to hear an audible voice from God.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe a lot of people are like that. You just casually breezed over the fact that you love working with middle schoolers, which is objectively the most awkward, uncomfortable age ever. And you work with middle schoolers to talk about sex and relationships, which is also awkward and uncomfortable for 99% of the population. And obviously it's something that you were designed to do, because that's not something I would pick. None of that. I would pick none of that.
It really is something that the only way to explain the natural ability is that I have to be wired this way. Right. Because it's not something I have tried to train other people.
It's tough.
And not many people stick, because it is something that you really genuinely have to be wired in a certain way to be able to connect on that level with students. What I've found, though, is that with the Truth Talks program, there is a level of vulnerability that I'm allowed to project to them that makes them feel safe and gives them space to then be vulnerable. And it's almost like a very quick trust bond is formed through those topics, because most adults shy away from the topics. And so when there's an adult who's willing to step into the awkward, it really wins you
some points with the middle schoolers.
They're very quick to be like, oh, you're really going to just tell us like it is. Yeah. And they quickly learn to trust that I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm not going to breeze over things and say, oh, well, when you're older, if you have the questions, we're going to talk about it, because you need the information.
One of the things that I found, I got the opportunity one time
privilege. It was a privilege.
Got the privilege to be your secondary whiteboard writer one time for a couple days. One week you were at one of our local middle schools. And one thing that I found fascinating that you didn't share is that at the end of every session, you allow these middle school students, to write any question that they want on a piece of paper, and you address those questions the next day. Yeah. So that's where the real awkward comes, because they're anonymous. They get to ask things that they really want to know. Yeah. without the, the social pressure of having to ask things that
they don't have to raise their hand.
Yeah, may feel weird or, okay, so I didn't prepare you for this, but man, maybe our podcast audience isn't ready for this either. But what is the most awkward or weird question you've ever been asked in the question box?
So one of the funniest questions, and it wasn't necessarily a question as much as just a statement that a student wrote a few years ago. A student wrote down, "Isn't erectile dysfunction just another name for Balzheimer's?"
Well, that's a dad joke from. So you had to hear that from their dad.
That kid is going places. That is.
Oh, that's
just elite level questioning. The question that I get probably most often, that still is always a little bit awkward, or just makes me be like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this, because it is a sexual risk avoidance program, and because we are presenting that abstinence is the healthiest choice for them, not that it is the only choice, because we do educate them on other ways to reduce risk, but we always circle back to, abstinence is your only way to avoid risk altogether. And so it is very much focused on abstinence being the healthiest choice. At least per grade, once per school, I will have a student ask if I chose abstinence. And so that is always one of those questions that it's like, I'm going to be honest with them.
Right.
And that is something that over the years has earned me a lot of respect from students. The best memory ever is a student that I had at church, and he had been through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade truth talks with me. Freshman year, he decided to kind of show off a little bit our relationship in class. And at the high school, we don't do anonymous questions anymore. Like, you're in high school now, you can ask the questions. Let's learn to have some, have some kind of boldness about us. And so he, in front of all of half the freshman football team, was like, Nikki, why don't you tell them about your decision for abstinence? Spoiler alert, I didn't choose abstinence. And so that is always the students are always kind of taken aback when I'm honest with them about that, because I think a lot of adults, the whole, do as I say, not as I do, they would prefer to not be honest about that. And so he wanted to share my authenticity with the rest of the group. He wanted to make sure that they knew that I was going to be real and tell them the truth.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most awkward. Obviously, there's always the crazy stuff that I know they've heard online or stuff like that. Sometimes I'll have to Google things, because even I'm like, what is that?
That's an Urban Dictionary conversation right there.
They do like to ask me a lot about slang words that I know they know what they mean. They're just trying to see. They
just want you to say it.
They wanted to know if I knew what Riz meant. I'm like, I do. And now you're going to get a lesson on where that came from. And so I explained to them that Riz is short for charisma. And so I always like to flip it back around on them and say, you're using this slang word. You don't even know where it came from.
Yeah. Now you're going to know.
Yeah.
Now you're going to know. So
they're fun, though. I love middle schoolers.
Yeah. You and mostly just you. I mean, yeah, mostly just you. That's what makes it so unique about you, though. And so if you are listening to this and you haven't listened to, was it episode 3 and 4? I think it's 3 and 4. We can link them in the show notes. But we walked through how you can go about sort of identifying your made for this, and it's a funnel. And we're just going to kind of look at, how you navigated some of those things, Nikki. And the top of the funnel is always the personality thing. So I am a huge personality profile nerd. I like those assessments and quizzes. I've taken, I don't know, some random crazy ones that don't really amount to much, just pop up on my news feed from here to there, here and there, and I'll always take them. I'm interested. But what's the best sort of personality type assessment or quiz you've ever taken, and what'd you get out of it?
Okay. So best free personality assessment that I have ever done and have learned from the most is the Enneagram.
Yeah.
Keep your opinions what they are. It's fine. You can like it. You can not like it. There's lots of crazy theories around the Enneagram and where it came from. However, I have found it very, very helpful in recognizing why I respond the way that I respond to the world around me. That has been immensely educational for me, just to understand me. Yeah. And to be able to recognize that when things take place, my response to them is coming from a place of, this is how I'm wired. This is, based off of, past experiences and all these things. This kind of culminates into me responding this way. And so that has been really helpful because I think we can get caught in a place of getting frustrated with ourselves and not understanding why we respond or react in different ways. And so I think recognizing that has been very, very helpful. For those of you who do know about the Enneagram, I am an Enneagram 6. Yeah. I'm a counterphobic 6, which I like to make that distinction.
Yeah, it's a little different. And it's the only one of the numbers that has that.
It is the only one that has a double kind of thing. So counterphobic 6s, 6s in general tend to be very skeptical. They tend to be the people who are very prepared and think about worst case scenarios. They will look at, this is the worst that could happen. Also, this bad thing could happen and this bad thing could happen. And I'm going to be prepared for all three scenarios.
Is there a notable TV character or movie character that you can recall that's a 6?
So the one that comes to my mind is Randall from This Is Us. Have you ever watched This Is Us? This Is Us was a really popular TV show. Randall and his wife would do worst case scenario. Oh, yeah. Like they would take a moment in any situation and they'd be like, okay, we've got 5 minutes, go worst case scenario. And then they would just spiral and let out all of their worst case scenario thoughts. And then they'd be like, okay, we're good. And then they would move through it. And so counterphobic 6s, the way that I'm wired is that I do think through all of those things, but I don't let it keep me fearful or paralyzed. I take that information and then I push forward and I kind of go head on into what I view as a threat or what I view as a challenge. And so that is, in the Enneagram, you have like tri-types. So you have your main Enneagram number, and then you have 2 other Enneagram numbers because it's head, heart, and gut are the 3 main areas. And so a 6 is a gut number. And then I also have a 2, which is a helper, which makes a lot of sense in kind of the fields that I'm very much involved in the nonprofit sector. And then the 8, which is very much a in-your-face challenger, very justice-oriented. Right. And so that is something that has been a theme in my life, is that I've always been someone who seeks fairness. I hate to see people be bullied and people to be marginalized. That's something that I always want to stand for. And that may be why I feel such a fondness towards middle schoolers, because they do tend to get a bad rep and people do tend to...
To be fair, they earn it to a degree.
Well, they do, but...
But I mean, we all did. I did too. I was
it's not necessarily middle schooler. Deserved always.
Yeah. It's that whole prefrontal cortex thing. Yeah.
And so I think that knowing the way that I'm wired and knowing those things about myself, I can, like I said, I can see where I have a tendency to react, and then I can adjust so that I can respond, because there's a difference in reacting and responding. Responding is a choice. And so that's been really beneficial for me to be able to stop and know what my triggers are, know what my patterns are, and be able to respond to things from a place of knowledge of like this. It really bothers me when things go off tracks from the plan that I had. If I have planned something out and the weather isn't what the weather app told me it was going to be, that can really send me into a tailspin.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. So my family jokes that, my husband will say, we're going to go with the flow, and the flow is mom. So she's our flow, and that's how things happen, because they've always thought that vacations, we just go with the flow. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I'm the flow. So
that's funny. If you've never done the Enneagram, we'll leave a link to a free version in the show notes. But Nikki and I actually also both went and spoke to the same Enneagram coach and did like this much nicer paid version of the quiz or assessment. And I would love to get her on the show sometime.
Lots of extra insight there. So I'd say the best free version that was a great starting point. But
Right.
if you find that helpful, it is incredibly helpful to spend some time with somebody that can really dig deeper into that. My favorite solo paid for one is the Strengths Finder.
Yeah,
I think the Strengths Finder is very, what is it, like $20 maybe?
Yeah, something like that. And
25.
I was actually looking the other day, if you get one of these books,
There's a code in there.
and it's cheaper.
Yeah,
the book is cheaper than the quiz or whatever the assessment. So if you buy the book,
yep,
you get a discount on the assessment and you get the book, which kind of fleshes out all the strengths a little bit more.
Yeah, so that one has been very helpful, because what I learned from that is that you have strengths, but they're essentially just things that you have an inclination to be gifted or talented in. You still have to develop it.
Right.
And so I think it's very helpful to learn what your strengths are, so that then you can spend time developing those.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
nobody likes to waste their time. And so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time trying to be strategic when I'm not really gifted at being strategic.
Yeah, it doesn't come natural.
Yeah.
So kind of in line with your personality, you know, as a 6 and just the way that you're wired, what are the areas or what are the qualities of you that are just the word that we've kind of tossed around is immutable, but that's a weird word. So like, what are the things in you that you just can't turn off and still be true to who you are?
Yeah. So in line with that 6, I'm a questioner. So I'm always questioning, and I'm an extremely honest person.
Right.
Like, that is one of those things that if you ask me your opinion or ask me my opinion, you need to be prepared.
Yeah, to get the
truth.
My
opinion, because I'm going to be honest. That is something that I can't be. I struggle with a lack of transparency. I guess I'm a very transparent person, and because I always want to know why, I lean towards always explaining my why to other people.
Right.
I don't like to, even with my kids, I'm not a because I said so kind of parent. I'm always going to say my answer is no, and this is the reason.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that the reason's up for debate or negotiation.
Sure.
I have to tell my daughter that a lot, because she'll be like, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, that's okay. Doesn't have to, but I gave you the reason.
Yeah.
And the answer's still no.
Yeah.
Because I put a lot of thought into that reason. Trust me, I don't make things up without weighing it against the committee in my head.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thought process that goes behind these things. But that, I would say, honesty, transparency, and just kind of a search for truth is something. Those are things about me that have been my whole entire life. Those are things that as a kid, I was always just a very honest, open.
Right.
I would say what I was thinking. I'd ask the questions that nobody else wanted to ask. Sometimes authority figures did not love that about me. And so I had, some teachers and things like that I butted heads with in school. But those are things about me that if I had muted those, then that just wouldn't be, I would be denying myself.
Right. Well, and I would say that, interestingly enough, honesty is something that I would strive, or I would, I guess, encourage everyone to strive towards. Honesty is a kind of one of those things that we should all ascribe to. But transparency, while I also value transparency, that's not something that comes natural to a lot of people. Yeah. The fact that it kind of comes naturally to you does set you apart from certain people in the world. And I think that that's important to recognize, just that you're naturally wired to be transparent. So as we travel down, the Made for This funnel, personality kind of is just how you're wired. But beyond that are the things that you're just very naturally passionate about. So what are the things, Nikki, that you're super passionate about? The things that make you say, like, put me in the game, coach. Yeah. The kind of, honestly, when I think about passion, I always think about the things that, you toss and turn at night thinking about, or you spring out of bed in the morning and you're like, I got to get onto this thing. Like, what are those things that just light up your passion? Yeah.
So like I mentioned earlier that I hate bullies. And so that is something that, standing up for people who I feel like are being marginalized or, just taken advantage of, those types of things, is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And I think that speaks into building confidence in teenagers in their value and their worth, because it's really hard to take advantage of and marginalize people who know how valuable they are.
Yeah.
And so I think that speaks a lot into that's something I'm really passionate about and committed to, because I know the power that comes with that. I've joked before that when I see teenage girls who have the confidence that I have now as an almost 40-year-old woman, I'm like, I would have been unstoppable if I had had the hard-fought confidence and value that I have now in my teenage years. You couldn't have told me nothing. Like, I would have been just probably unbearable to be around, honestly. But that is something that I can see the power in it. And so that's something I'm so passionate about. And I will always, if I have the ability and the time, and sometimes even if I don't, I will always say yes to a cause that is to that end. So if there is, anytime that a nonprofit or something's come up, and people are sharing with me, if it has to do with equipping teenagers, young adults, with learning their value, knowing their purpose, helping them find, their belonging and who they are, I'm going to jump in on that.
Yeah. And I would say that that's partially one of the catalysts for this podcast.
Yeah.
Just, maybe not, the podcast is open to anybody, not just teenagers, but, just recognizing that, helping people see their values and their purpose and all of those things is important to you. And it's, gets you up in the morning, keeps you up at night.
And I think along with the, like thinking about the next generation. And when I say the next generation, I'm speaking specifically about Gen Z, and Gen Alpha is kind of coming up behind them pretty quickly. They're heading on into middle school at this point in the next couple of years. So they're kind of edging into that age group. I have seen so much, in the last 7 years, spending time around Gen Z specifically. They are desperate. They're so desperate for purpose.
Right.
They're so desperate for knowing who they are and seeking identity, and wanting to know that they matter. They want to know that they're valuable. They want to know that they exist for a reason. And so that's something that, and I know every person seeks that, and every person feels that, but it just seems so much more on the surface for that generation than any before. And so that's something that has kept me up more nights than I can count, thinking about ways that I can reach even just a handful of students, to be able to let them know just how valuable they are.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege a few times, and there are moments that like I will still get choked up every time I tell this story. But there was one girl specifically through the Truth Talks program that I got to engage with. She was maybe a junior or senior at the time, but she was pregnant. And I was in her class, and we were doing this exercise of like building your perfect spouse, which the purpose of it was to get teenagers to think about their non-negotiables outside of what you think about as a teenager. Because usually as a high school student, you're thinking about, are they hot? Do we have the same friend group? Do they have a cool car? Like, you think about these very surface level things. And so it was designed to get them to think about, like, do you have the same goals for your future? Do you want to travel? Do you want somebody who wants to travel? Like thinking about those things that sometimes we don't think about. And so I noticed that she was sitting there not doing it. She was just kind of like looking around and just not doing it. And so I went over and I was like, hey, what's going on? And she was like, I don't get to be picky. And it took me back for a second. I was like, what do you mean you don't get to be picky? And she was like, I'm having a baby in high school. Like, I'm just going to have to take whoever's willing to accept that. I'm going to be a single mom. I'm not going to get to be picky. That's really going to like narrow down my kind of pool of who I get to pick from. And I was like, stop right there. I was like, you get to be double picky. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, you get to pick for you and this baby. You should be double picky because you're picking not only a spouse for you, but you're literally picking a parent for this child now. Like you're picking a partner that we all are picking, fathers for our future children or mothers for our future children. But when there's a literal child already there, I was like, you get to be double picky about this. And so she was one of those students that wrote a thank you note afterwards saying, I know now that I'm valuable enough that I don't have to accept whatever is, just kind of available or is willing to accept me. But she was able to really see that she had value just the same as any of her peers did, and that she was able to make those decisions. And so those moments when I get to see that come on in a student, when I get to see a teenager recognize just how valuable they are and that means that they deserve healthy relationships, that's just a really incredible thing. And it's worth all of the awkward conversations to get to have those moments.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's, it's moments like that kind of do light you up. I mean, especially, if you're in a position where you're, and like we said a little earlier on, whether it's your job title or not, if you're in a position where you get to really kind of walk inside of your made for this, it's really powerful. You have moments like that, even if they're super awkward, or maybe, for me, I would have never been in that position. It would have been, that's not my made for this. So we've talked about, your personality and how you're wired, what makes you so passionate about your made for this. What are the specific things that you've kind of, skills and, we talk about strengths are things that you're naturally inclined to be good at, but then skills are things that you've taken the time and put in the effort to develop. What are some of those kind of strengths and skills that have really equipped you through the journey of developing your made for this, and what do those look like?
Yeah. So as far as strengths go, things that I'm just like naturally equipped with or naturally good at, using kind of that strengths finder language, my top strength is individualization.
Right.
And so really
which you
seeing,
just shared a story of almost.
And so really seeing the individual and not just looking at, sometimes I have in Truth Talk specifically, I'll have a class of, 40 middle schoolers that I'm looking at, but being able to see individuals and honing in on individual students and what they need in those moments in that brief, window of time that I get to be with them, being able to kind of see those things. And when I've had the privilege to walk deeper with teenagers, being able to really see individual needs, individual giftings, and really be able to speak into that, and have an opportunity to call out things that I see, and what people would be good at, and not just viewing them as, oh, well, you're like every other 14-year-old boy or every other 14-year-old girl, but being able to see those individual qualities that make that person special and being able to speak that into them. That's really valuable. And a lot of times, especially with teenagers, they can hear that from an outside person better than they can hear that from their parents.
Yeah.
And so they need those extra voices saying those things to them, because it just comes across differently when it's a person who doesn't have to say it, because oftentimes our kids think mom and dad have to say nice things to them.
They gotta love
me.
They gotta like me.
And so they just tend to like, kind of blow things off that you say. But when someone else says it, it's a big deal.
So that's one of your strengths that you're kind of naturally inclined to be good at. But how have you developed that in your life? Yeah.
So knowing that, so I didn't really necessarily recognize that was something that was a strength of mine until it was brought out in the Strengths Finder assessment. But once I recognized that, then I really started trying to practice that more, and really thinking about, what motivates people and how people are wired, and looking at individuals, because, you and I have this kind of proclivity towards personality tests, and we like to try to guess people's Enneagram types and those things. But I always try to be very mindful of thinking about the individual too, and understanding that while they may have a tendency to react a certain way or have certain patterns, that the individual is important too. And so looking at how that individual person shows up, and that's one of my other strengths that I have is empathy, which is, when I talk to especially with teenagers who that comes up in their strengths exams and stuff, I'm like, that's a heavy one. It is a really, really heavy strength to carry. because we tend to focus on other people way more than we focus on ourselves, and we
Right.
carry the weight of people's emotions.
That's tough.
Yeah. It's a really, really hard thing if you're not healthy and not recognizing it. You will attune to other people's emotions before you ever attune to your own. And so, but that strength really gives me the ability to look at why someone may be the way that they are. Being able to look at a difficult student who maybe seems to be pushing you away or pushing against ideas, really being able to kind of dig deep into that and say, okay, what about this is making you uncomfortable? Or why are you pushing against this so much? Tell me more about that. And being able to kind of see where that person's coming from and get curious about why a person would react to situations and why they would be seeking negative attention versus positive attention and those types of things. So those are two strengths that I've really tried to work on using to that extent, and kind of living my made for this, being able to put those to work to my benefit.
Yeah, that's cool. And you said something that stuck out to me. You and me both, and I'm sure others too, but we have a kind of a tendency to, like, we like to see, you're a 6. And so what does that look like? And how do you pair up against other 6s? But that's one of the things that I love so much about the Made for This is that you're a 6, but you're also passionate about middle schoolers, and you're passionate about helping them find value and identity and all those things. There's a lot of 6s out there who aren't that. Yeah. And then beyond that, you have specific strengths and skills that you've developed, and it just continues to get more and more granular to you, specifically you. And that's kind of the last the last framework of the whole exercise is that, there's people out there, I don't know how many, but there's probably another 1 or 2 out there that is a 6 that loves middle schoolers, that's, that has your similar strengths and things like that, but they've never walked the path that you've walked. They've never experienced the things that you've experienced. And I would just love to hear a little bit about how your unique to you, your one-of-one experiences have helped you, discover and develop your Made for This as you know it today.
Yeah. This is always a tough one because
it is the toughest,
especially when I said I was transparent. And then I'm like,
now you got to own that.
So I have to give the disclaimer because when my mom reads my blog post and stuff, or I share my journey online, she's like, I'm sorry. So Mom, if you listen to this, it's fine. You're off the hook. It's okay. It's not a big deal. We're learning from it. We're building things from it. It's fine. Growing up, my biological dad was very much a secondary character in my life. Very in and out. Sometimes he was very involved. Sometimes he was not involved at all. And so if you are someone who's experienced the rejection of a parent, that really messes with your value. It messes with your worth. It's just something that, regardless if you have step parents that come alongside you, any of those things, it's just really hard to overcome. Yeah. The idea that your own flesh and blood doesn't seem to want to be around you. And so for a young girl, that was very shaping for me. And so that is somewhat one of the reasons why that age group is so near and dear to my heart, because that's probably around middle school is when that really started to impact how I approached relationships, because I was seeking that validation constantly. I was always looking for someone outside of me to tell me that I was good enough, to tell me that I was wanted, to tell me that I was lovable. Right. And so that played out in a lot of really unhealthy relationship dynamics. And because I came from divorced parents, I didn't have the healthiest relationship dynamics to mirror at home. Yeah. And my my mom, largely just because like her parents didn't talk to her either. She wasn't equipped to have those kind of conversations with me about healthy relationships, or any of those things. And so I didn't really have anybody having those conversations with me. And I was, involved in church, very heavily involved in church. And for anyone who was in church in the late 90s, early 2000s, you may have a similar experience to me with purity culture, and very kind of high control, just approaches to how a Christian should live their life. And so I didn't have a lot of people encouraging me to ask the questions that I had. I was kind of asked to mute that part of myself, and not ask questions and just be very like, this is what it is, and take things for face value. And so a lot of that shaped how I view developing those things now, and how I view coming alongside teenagers to ask questions, and give them space to process things, giving them space to really explore how they interpret values and relationships and all of these different things, and just encouraging them to think about those things and think about what they value and what they desire from relationships, and what they believe, and just all of those different things that I didn't really have any framework to develop those things. That was just kind of handed to me of this is how it is, and I wasn't really given any kind of shaping for how else it could be. I had one adult in my life that was a blessing in disguise from a relationship that didn't really produce a lot of great things in my life. A guy that I dated, his mom was instrumental in really kind of developing some value and worth in me. And she's somebody that I've stayed in contact with still to this day, from high school, and my 20-year high school reunion's coming up. So we've known each other for 20 years now, and she's somebody that in moments when I didn't see my values, she would call it out, and she would say, "You're better than this," and she would say the hard things, and she would call me out and be like, "I don't like the person I see right now. This isn't who you are," and so that shaped me to want to be that for other young people, to be able to have that kind of relationship where I can say hard things, and they know that it's because I value them and I love them, and they're worth having their bad behavior called out. They're worth having someone say, "That's not you."
And I think I've probably learned this from you and your expertise in the area of teenagers, but not being called out on those things sort of communicates to them that they're not worth that. Yeah. Like it's, well, you're just a delinquent or whatever.
Right.
And I'm almost certain I've heard that from you. That's where I got that. But yeah, it's interesting that as I hear you talk through your experiences in life, you can hear so many of those things that we talked about earlier on sort of coming out of those experiences. And that seems like how it works. Is there anything about those experiences, the good things and the bad things? You've got this relationship that you don't still have today, but that man's mother has still been such an instrumental part of your life. You've had some negatives, you've had some ups and downs, just like all of us do. How have those experiences given you, a unique credibility in the way that you leverage your Made for This today?
Yeah. A lot of the credibility that it gives me is because I'm able to empathize with teenagers, whether they have incredible parents and incredible role models and all of those things. I'm still able to connect with them on a level of like, I remember what it was like being a teenager. I remember how hard that was. And so I can connect on that level, but more so with the teenagers that I've encountered that have had a similar background of being able to say to them, like, all of that can be true, and you're an extremely valuable person.
Yeah.
And you get to break cycles, and you get to write an completely new story.
Hmm.
Like my mom says all the time, like she's like, you went a completely different direction, and it's just so amazing to me.
Hmm.
Like I married a man who is nothing like my dad. And so I took all of that, and where a lot of people will repeat the cycle,
Right.
For whatever reason, probably because I've been wired with an incredible level of stubbornness.
Yeah.
I was determined that I was going to do something different. I was going to go in a different direction. And so I think that gives me a credibility of being able to speak to other young people to say, you can also do that. It doesn't have to be the way that you see it now. You can change, and you can have a completely different experience with your life because of your value, and knowing those things and recognizing that about yourself and setting up those boundaries of saying, I'm good enough. I deserve this. I deserve healthy relationships, that you can have those things, that you don't have to just accept how it's always been. And so that gives me kind of a unique credibility in that
Yeah, you've walked it.
Yeah.
You know, and you can say, yeah, I get it. I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, it is cool. It's cool how you're using it. And I think, it's just really fascinating to see, what you would consider to be you were made for this happening in real time because of, the way you've been built, designed, or created, or whatever verbiage you want to use on that. And how your experiences have really kind of placed you in a unique position to be able to do that and to make the world, your world, however large or small that may be, a better place, which is cool.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Nikki, that you want to share? Kind of as we've unpacked all of your whole journey there.
So I will say I didn't say it on the skills part. We talk a lot about like honing, like what you're naturally gifted at and not focusing on trying to be good at something that you're not good at. Public speaking is not a skill for me. It is not a strength for me. In fact, I have a history of passing out in those situations. That is something that I struggled with a lot growing up, of getting up and like speaking. Now, if I was in a group, I did choir performances, all district, all of those types of things. As long as I had my people with me, those types of things, I was fine. But me in a stage, me in a platform, me in a microphone was not something that I ever thought that I would do. And I still really don't love to do it in front of adults. I feel like they're judgier than middle schoolers ever could be.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
So that is something that is not a skill. That is something I've had to hone. And that's something that when I tell middle schoolers that public speaking is something that it makes me sick to my stomach still to this day, they're like, what? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I know. So
do it.
So there are some things that I will say if everything else, if every other box is ticked and you're like, I think this is my made for this, but there's this one thing that's holding me back that's not a natural gifting, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like there are some things that they're meant to be overcome. There are some obstacles that if it comes too easy, it may not be.
Right.
It may not be worth it. I don't know. Like
it
was that old saying, nothing worthwhile ever came easy, or something like that. Nothing worth doing is whatever. So that would be my kind of encouragement to someone who's trying to find their made for this and maybe has hit some type of roadblock like that. Stuff like that can be developed. Yeah. And I think if the passion is there and everything else is there, you can overcome something like that.
Yeah, that's true. The made for this, much like any of the assessments, Enneagram, and while the made for this does get a little bit more granular because there's so many pieces to it, just like the Enneagram or the Strengths Finder, it's not an exact science. There's going to be times you have to kind of turn the knobs a little bit. But yeah, I would agree with that. Well, Nikki, where can anyone find you if they want to follow you and your made for this? Where can people find what's going on with you?
So you mentioned unborrowed.org, is a side project that I I don't know what it is yet. So if you have input, let me know what you think it should be.
Yeah.
Because right now it's kind of in flux and just kind of figuring out what that is. I'm not exciting on social media, but you can find me at Nikki Tabor, all the different social media platforms. I don't post a lot. So.
Well, and your Unborrowed stuff is on most of the social platforms too.
Again, I don't post a lot.
Well, we'll leave links to all that in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm not super great at the social media yet. Well, I do have on unborrowed.org, there is a survey that is open for anybody to take because I would love to gather more data about people's journeys and where they're at and where they are trying to go and what would be beneficial to them because I really want to expand the reach of the unborrowed faith concept of helping people develop an unborrowed faith. The website is much more geared towards your Christian faith. But like I said, it can encompass a lot of other things of really trying to nail down your own personal values and those types of things and the what behind the why and making sure that you're not just regurgitating but what's just always been. Because a lot of us walk around just being whoever our family of origin told us we were.
Yeah, that's good.
So whether that be, you were always told that you weren't a very smart person, or you were told that, you were always going to live in a certain circumstance, or, who would marry you? I don't know. Like whatever.
Or that you have to be, you don't have any room to be picky.
Right. Like you don't have any room to be picky. Or even people who, if you feel like you've just been like pigeonholed into, this is the career path that I have to choose because my dad was this and my grandfather was this. And so I just have to go this way. You can be your own person and you can develop those things and you can really stop and ask yourself, why do I believe it has to be this way?
Yeah.
And you may find that there are things that you'll be like, yeah, I do want to keep that. And that's great. But know the what or the why behind the what.
Yeah.
Like
know the why behind the what.
Know why you're holding on to values, regardless if they're, along with a Christ-centered worldview and your faith, or if it's just your personal views about yourself and relationships and how you view the world and all of those different things. We all really need to spend some time owning that for ourselves and making sure that we are that we're true to ourselves.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave links to all the Unborrowed stuff in the show notes so people can find that there and reach out. And I'll leave a special link.
Yeah, and all my contact information is on there. So
yeah, and I'll leave a special link for the survey so people could jump in there real easy and kind of get involved with that. So Nikki, thanks for being our first guest on the podcast, but also as our co-host. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you want to say just as we kind of wrap up this episode from a host seat?
Get out there and discover you're made for this.
Yeah. Discover it. There's bunches of stuff in the show notes that you can start to do that, or go back and listen to episodes 3 and 4. Start doing that. We would love to have a conversation with you if you need guidance. We're there for that. And then once you start discovering it, start building on it. Start developing it, strengths and skills and all those things.
In the kind of same vein of value, you have value, you have worth.
Right.
And we need you. We need you to live as authentically you.
Yep, that's true.
We need people to show up and be who they are because the world's missing out.
Yeah,
if you're not there, then we're missing out on something. And we'll never know. It's kind of like the butterfly effect.
Yeah, that's true.
We never really know what it could be if people aren't showing up as authentically themselves and impacting the world around them. So if you're sitting on the bench, get up, get in there, do something. Make a difference in a positive way. Don't get out there and wreak havoc.
That's good.
Make a positive difference.
That's good. Well, if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things that whatever platform you're on. We're on all the major platforms, and they all do a little bit different things. So whatever you're on, whatever you're listening or watching on, just interact with us there. Like, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. In the next one, Nikki's going to interview me, and we're going to do kind of the same sort of exercise. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that. And until next time, like Nikki said, go out there and discover, develop, and live. You're made for this. We'll talk to you next time.